The crystal award sat heavy in my hands, its edges catching the ballroom lights as 500 of the industry's most powerful dealmakers rose to their feet. My ex-boyfriend Daniel sat frozen at table 12, his jaw slack as the spotlight found me at the podium. The same man who'd told me I'd never survive in business because I felt too much was now watching me accept the most prestigious award in corporate negotiations. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how the girl everyone called too soft for the real world ended up here, I need to take you back to when I believed them. The morning everything changed started like any other disaster. I was 23, living in a studio apartment with a leaking ceiling and working as a junior analyst at Brennan & Associates, where crying in the bathroom was practically part of my job description. If you've ever felt like your greatest strength was actually your biggest weakness, like the very thing that made you who you are was the thing holding you back, then you'll understand why I'm sharing this. Sometimes we need to hear that the qualities others mock might be the exact ones that lead to our greatest triumphs. So stay with me, because what happened next changed not just my career, but my entire understanding of power. My name is Sophie Chen, though for most of my life, people preferred other labels. Too emotional Sophie. Bleeding heart Sophie. Sophie who takes everything personally. At Brennan & Associates, I was the girl who secretly kept tissues in every desk drawer, who couldn't watch the news without tearing up, who felt physically sick when I had to deliver bad news to anyone. My colleagues would exchange knowing looks whenever I got choked up during meetings about layoffs or budget cuts. They weren't mean about it exactly, just dismissive in that particular way that made me feel like a child who'd wandered into an adult conversation. Daniel had been the worst of them, which made it particularly cruel that I'd fallen in love with him. We'd met at a company mixer 2 years earlier, when I was fresh out of college and still believed that sensitivity and success could coexist. He was everything I thought I wanted to be: sharp, decisive, utterly unshakable. Senior analyst at 28, youngest person ever promoted to that level at Brennan. He wore his emotional detachment like expensive cologne, and somehow, inexplicably, he'd chosen me. "You're refreshing," he'd said on our first date, watching me tear up over a story about rescued puppies on my phone. So genuine. Most girls in this industry, they're all trying so hard to be tough. I should have heard the condescension in his voice. Should have noticed how he said it like I was a curiosity, a pet project, something quaint and amusing but ultimately temporary. But I was 21 and desperate to be seen as more than just the office crier, so I let myself believe that Daniel saw something in me that others missed. For 18 months, I tried to become the woman he wanted. I practiced keeping my face neutral during sad movies. I bit my tongue when coworkers made cruel jokes about unemployed people being lazy. I learned to say things like, "It's just business," and "Don't take it personally," even when every fiber of my being screamed that business was personal, that everything we did affected real people with real lives and real feelings. The breaking point came during a particularly brutal acquisition deal. Brennan was representing a tech giant that was buying out a family-owned software company. The terms were predatory. The family would lose everything they'd built over 30 years, and 300 employees would lose their jobs. During the final negotiation meeting, the founder's daughter broke down crying, begging us to reconsider the terms, explaining how this company was her late father's legacy, how the employees were like family, how entire communities depended on those jobs. I felt her pain like a physical wound. My eyes burned with unshed tears, my throat closed up, and I had to excuse myself from the room. When I returned, trying to compose myself, Daniel wouldn't even look at me. That night, in my apartment, he ended things with the kind of clinical efficiency he brought to hostile takeovers. "Sophie, you're a sweet girl," he said, not even sitting down, keeping his coat on like he was afraid my emotions might be contagious. "But this industry isn't for people like you. You feel everything too deeply. It makes you weak, makes you a liability. You'll never be able to make the hard decisions, never be able to separate feelings from facts. I need someone who can be my equal, My partner. Someone strong. Empathy isn't weakness, I whispered, but even I didn't believe it anymore. In this world, it absolutely is. He paused at my door, looking back with something that might have been pity. You should consider another career, maybe teaching or social work. Something where being sensitive is actually an asset. After he left, I sat on my floor and cried until I had nothing left. Not just because he'd broken my heart, but because I believed he was right. Every mentor I'd ever had told me to toughen up. Every performance review mentioned my emotional responses as an area for improvement. Every successful person I knew seemed to have perfected the art of not caring. The next morning, I walked into Brennan & Associates and submitted my resignation. My supervisor, Margaret Brennan herself, barely looked up from her computer. "Probably for the best," she said, signing my exit paperwork without hesitation. Some people just aren't cut out for this level of corporate warfare. I cleaned out my desk in 20 minutes. 3 years of trying to force myself into a mold that didn't fit, and all I had to show for it was a box of personal items and a reputation as the girl who couldn't hack it. As I waited for the elevator, I heard Daniel's voice from the conference room, already strategizing the next acquisition, the next family business to devour, the next group of employees to discard. He sounded confident, successful, everything I would never be. That should have been the end of my story in the corporate world, and it would have been, if not for the email that arrived 3 weeks later. I was sitting in my pajamas at 2 p.m., scrolling through teaching certification programs and trying to convince myself that Daniel had done me a favor, when my phone buzzed with a notification. The sender's name made me freeze. Evelyn Zhang, CEO of Zhang International, one of the most successful negotiation firms in the world. The subject line simply read, "An unusual proposition." "Ms. Chen," the email began, "I recently learned about your resignation from Brennan & Associates. I also happened to review the security footage from your final acquisition meeting, the one where you excused yourself during the family's emotional plea. Most people would see that as weakness. I see something else entirely. I see someone who understands what my competitors don't, that emotion is data, that empathy is intelligence, and that the future of negotiation isn't about crushing opponents, but about finding solutions that honor everyone's humanity. If you're interested in learning a different way to succeed in this industry, I'd like to meet with you. Fair warning, what I'm proposing will challenge everything you've been taught about power, success, and the role of feelings in business." I read the email 4 times, certain it was some kind of cruel joke. Evelyn Zhang was a legend, but not the kind they taught about in business school. She was known for unconventional methods, for deals that somehow left everyone satisfied, for negotiations that ended with former enemies becoming partners. The old guard dismissed her as soft, lucky, a fluke. But her track record was undeniable. 15 years without a single failed negotiation. Clients ranging from Fortune 500 companies to international peace organizations, and a success rate that made traditional firms seethe with envy. 3 days later, I sat across from her in a restaurant so exclusive it didn't even have a sign. Evelyn was nothing like I'd expected. Where Margaret Brennan had been all sharp angles and power suits, Evelyn wore a flowing silk dress and smiled like she actually meant it. She ordered tea for both of us without asking, somehow knowing I preferred jasmine, and studied me with eyes that seemed to see straight through my attempted professional facade. "Tell me," she said, skipping all small talk, "what did you feel when that founder's daughter cried?" The question caught me off guard. I felt her desperation, her grief. It was like watching someone lose a family member. "And what did your colleagues feel?" "Nothing. Or if they did, they hid it well." Evelyn leaned forward. "Wrong. They felt it too. They just believed that acknowledging those feelings would make them weak, so they shut down that part of themselves, cut off access to crucial information. You see, Sophie, every negotiation is about emotions: fear, hope, pride, desperation, love. The people who ignore these emotions, who try to operate purely on logic and leverage. They're working with incomplete data. But someone who can feel what everyone in the room is feeling? Someone who can understand the emotional landscape as clearly as the financial one? That person has a superpower. But Daniel said, "Daniel is a fool." The words were gentle but firm. He's playing by outdated rules, using brute force in a world that increasingly requires finesse. Let me ask you something. In that acquisition meeting, what do you think the family really wanted? I thought back to the founder's daughter, her shaking hands, her father's photo on the table. They wanted to preserve their father's legacy. They wanted their employees to be taken care of. The money was secondary. Exactly. And did anyone at Brennan even consider structuring a deal that addressed those emotional needs? No, they just focused on the purchase price and liability limitations. Evelyn smiled. This is why traditional firms are losing ground. They treat negotiations like math problems when they're actually emotional puzzles. I want to teach you a different way, but I need to know you're ready to embrace everything about yourself that others have told you to hide. What if I cry in meetings? The question tumbled out before I could stop it. Then you cry. Tears are data too. They tell you when something really matters, when you've hit the heart of what someone cares about. The trick isn't to stop feeling. It's to feel everything and use that information strategically. She offered me a position as her apprentice. Not an employee, she stressed, but a student of what she called empathetic strategy. The salary was less than I'd made at Brennan. The hours would be longer, and she warned me that the first year would involve unlearning everything I thought I knew about power and success. I said yes before she finished talking. The first 6 months were brutal in ways I hadn't expected, not because the work was hard, though it was, but because I had to deprogram years of conditioning. Evelyn would put me in practice negotiations, where she'd deliberately trigger emotional responses, then teach me to observe my feelings without being controlled by them, to use them as a compass rather than a chain. Feel everything, she would say, but choose your response consciously. She taught me to read micro-expressions, to notice the slight tremor in someone's voice that indicated fear, the way people touched their wedding rings when family security was at stake, the particular quality of silence that meant someone was about to break. But more importantly, she taught me to acknowledge these observations openly, to name the emotions in the room that everyone else was trying to ignore. My first real test came 8 months into my apprenticeship. A small biotech company was being forced into a hostile takeover by a larger competitor. The CEO, Dr. Sarah Kim, had spent 15 years developing a treatment for a rare childhood disease that had killed her daughter. The acquiring company planned to shelve the research as unprofitable. Traditional negotiations said she had no leverage. Her company was hemorrhaging money, investors were fleeing, and the acquisition offer, while insulting, was the only thing between her and bankruptcy. When we walked into that conference room, I felt the weight of Dr. Kim's desperation like a physical presence. The acquiring company's team, led by a man who reminded me painfully of Daniel, smirked at our presence. They knew they held all the cards. "Dr. Kim," I began, ignoring the acquisition team entirely, "tell me about your daughter." The room went silent. The lead negotiator from the other side actually laughed. "This is your strategy? Emotional manipulation?" But Dr. Kim's eyes filled with tears as she pulled out a photo of a little girl with bright eyes and a hospital gown. Emma. She was 7 when we lost her. She made me promise to help other kids like her. I felt my own eyes burning, and for once I didn't fight it. "That's not just a company you're trying to save. It's a promise to Emma." "This is ridiculous," the lead negotiator interrupted. "We're here to discuss terms, not have a therapy session." I turned to him, letting him see the tears on my face. "You have children, Mr. Davidson, 2 daughters, ages 9 and 12. I saw the photos on your desk during our preliminary meeting." His expression shifted slightly. "Imagine one of them was sick with something only Dr. Kim's research could cure. Imagine you had to look her in the eye and tell her that Daddy helped kill the cure because it wasn't profitable enough. That's not..." But it is. That's exactly what this is. And deep down, you know it. I can see it in the way you won't look at Dr. Kim's photo of Emma, in the way your hand keeps moving to your phone where I'm betting you have pictures of your own girls. The room was electric with tension. Evelyn watched from the corner, her expression neutral but her eyes bright with approval. "So, here's what we're going to do," I continued, my voice steady despite the tears. "We're going to structure a deal that saves both companies and the research. Your company needs Dr. Kim's patents and research team to stay competitive in biotech. Dr. Kim needs funding and infrastructure. Instead of an acquisition, we're proposing a partnership. Your company provides the funding and distribution network. Dr. Kim's team continues the research with full autonomy. You get 40% of any profits from the childhood disease treatment, but Dr. Kim retains control of the research direction and the right to ensure affordable access for patients who can't pay." "That's leaving money on the table," Davidson protested, but his voice had lost its edge. "No, it's investing in something more valuable than money. It's investing in being able to look your daughters in the eye and tell them their father chose to be a hero instead of just another corporate raider." The silence stretched for 30 seconds. Then Davidson's second-in-command, a woman who'd been silent the entire meeting, spoke up. "My nephew has the same disease Emma had. I've been trying to convince the board to look at orphan drug development for years." The dynamic in the room shifted. Suddenly, we weren't adversaries but people with shared hopes and fears. It took 4 more hours of negotiation, but we structured a deal that saved Dr. Kim's research, gave the acquiring company a foothold in orphan drug development, and created a foundation in Emma's name to ensure treatment access for low-income families. When we left that building, Dr. Kim hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. "They told me business wasn't personal," she whispered. "Thank God you knew better." That night, Evelyn took me to dinner to celebrate. "You did something in there that I couldn't have done," she said. "You didn't just use empathy as a tool. You made everyone in that room remember their humanity. That's a rare gift." But the real test was yet to come. A 1.5 years into my apprenticeship, Evelyn called me into her office with an expression I'd never seen before. "We've been asked to handle something unprecedented," she said, "a negotiation that every major firm has already failed. If we succeed, it will change everything. If we fail, it could end both our careers." The case was a nightmare. 2 tech giants locked in a patent dispute that had escalated into corporate warfare. Lawsuits, counter-lawsuits, employee poaching, sabotage. Between them, they employed over 100,000 people, and the legal battle was bleeding both companies dry. The CEOs, former best friends and business partners, now refused to be in the same room. Traditional negotiators had tried everything: mediation, arbitration, shuttle diplomacy. Nothing worked because the conflict had stopped being about patents or money. It was personal. "Why us?" I asked. "Because the board members are desperate enough to try anything, even emotional intelligence." Evelyn's smile was sharp. "They don't believe we can succeed. They're hiring us to say they tried everything before declaring total war. But I think you can do something here that no one else can." "Me? Not us?" "This is your graduation test, Sophie. I'll be there, but you'll lead." The weight of that responsibility was terrifying. These weren't small companies or family businesses. These were corporations that could buy and sell small countries. One wrong move could trigger a legal battle that would destroy thousands of jobs and millions in shareholder value. I spent 3 weeks preparing, studying not just the legal briefs and financial statements, but the personal histories of the CEOs. Marcus Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, and James Wright had built their first company in Marcus's garage 20 years ago. They'd been best men at each other's weddings, godfathers to each other's children. The split had come 5 years ago over a disagreement about company direction. Both felt betrayed. Both were convinced the other had stolen everything from them. The first meeting was scheduled for neutral ground, a conference room in a hotel in Chicago. But when I arrived, I made an unconventional decision. Instead of the conference room, I had both CEOs brought to the hotel's kitchen, where I was helping the staff prepare lunch. "What the hell is this?" James Wright demanded, standing in his $1,000 suit looking at the industrial stoves and prep tables. Marcus arrived moments later, his face darkening when he saw James. "If this is some kind of joke—" "It's not a joke," I said, handing them both aprons. 20 years ago, you two started a company making software in a garage. But before that, you were line cooks together at a restaurant in Palo Alto. That's where you became friends, where you dreamed up your first ideas. So before we talk about patents and lawsuits, we're going to cook together. The lunch rush starts in an hour." "This is insane," Marcus said. "No, insane is destroying 2 companies and thousands of jobs because you're both too proud to remember that you once loved each other like brothers." My voice cracked on the word loved, and I let it. "I read the emails you sent each other in the early days. The ones where James called you the brother he never had. The ones where Marcus said he couldn't imagine building anything without you. Those men are still in there, under all the lawyers and anger and hurt." James's jaw tightened. "You don't understand what he did. He took the company in a direction you disagreed with after you'd both agreed to stick to the original vision," I said. "You felt betrayed, like he chose money over your friendship." Then I turned to Marcus. "And you felt like James was holding the company back, that his refusal to adapt was going to destroy everything you'd both built. You felt like you were saving the company, and he painted you as a villain for it." Both men stared at me. "You were both right, and you were both wrong. But more importantly, you both lost the person who mattered most to you in the world, and you've been trying to fill that hole with anger ever since." The kitchen was silent, except for the distant clatter of dishes. "Cook with me," I said quietly. "Not as CEOs, not as enemies, just as Marcus and James, 2 guys who once knew how to make a perfect risotto together." For a moment, I thought they would walk out. Then James picked up a knife and started chopping onions. His eyes watered, and maybe it was just the onions, but I don't think so. Marcus watched him for a long moment, then moved to the stove and started heating olive oil. For the first 20 minutes, they didn't speak. They just moved around each other with the muscle memory of 2 people who'd spent countless hours in kitchens together. Then James quietly said, "You still add too much salt." "You still undercook the rice," Marcus replied. It wasn't friendly, but it was familiar. As we cooked, I talked about my own story. About Daniel, about being told I was too sensitive, about learning that feeling everything didn't make me weak. "The thing about emotions," I said, stirring a sauce, "is that we think they make us vulnerable. But vulnerability is just another word for truth, and nothing real can be built without truth." "I was scared," Marcus said suddenly, his voice rough. "The company was everything to me. When the market started shifting, I was terrified we'd lose it all. I didn't know how to tell you I was scared." James's hand stilled on the cutting board. "I was scared too. Scared that changing would mean losing what made us special. Scared that you didn't need me anymore." "I needed you every day," Marcus's voice broke. "Every decision I made, I heard your voice in my head arguing with me. Even when I hated you, I missed you." The lunch rush came and went. We served 43 customers, and somewhere between the appetizers and desserts, Marcus and James started talking. Really talking. Not about patents or lawsuits, but about their kids, their fears, their regrets. By the time we sat down to eat the staff meal together, they were both crying. "I want my friend back," James said simply. "I want my brother back," Marcus replied. The actual negotiation took 3 more days, but the real work had been done in that kitchen. They merged their companies back together, creating a structure that honored both innovation and tradition. They dropped all lawsuits, turned their competing patents into a shared portfolio, and created a foundation for entrepreneurship education with their settlement funds going to charity instead of lawyers. But the moment that changed my life came at the press conference announcing the merger. A reporter asked how they'd resolved such an intractable conflict. Marcus and James looked at each other, then Marcus spoke. "We hired someone who understood that business is personal, that emotions are data, and that true strength comes from being vulnerable enough to admit when you're hurt." Sophie Chen didn't just negotiate a deal, she reminded us how to be human. The video of that press conference went viral. Within a week, I had offers from companies around the world wanting someone who could do what traditional negotiation couldn't. Evelyn promoted me from apprentice to full partner, and we rebranded the firm as Zhang and Chen Empathetic Strategy Partners. The next 2 years were a whirlwind. I negotiated peace between warring fashion houses, helped reconcile a family business torn apart by succession disputes, and mediated labor disputes that had turned violent. Every case was different, but the approach was the same. Acknowledge the emotions everyone else was ignoring, create space for vulnerability, and remember that behind every position was a person with fears, hopes, and dreams. My reputation grew, but so did the criticism. Traditional negotiators called my methods unprofessional, manipulative, and yes, too sensitive. Business journals ran op-eds about how feelings-based negotiation was a dangerous trend that would undermine corporate effectiveness. One particularly nasty article called me the participation trophy of negotiators, making everyone feel good while accomplishing nothing substantial. Daniel even reached out once, after a particularly high-profile success. His email was brief. "Saw the news about the pharmaceutical merger. Interesting approach. Hope you're well." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say to someone who still thought empathy was weakness. The case that would lead to the Negotiator of the Year award came to me on a rainy Tuesday in October. It was supposed to be impossible. A 3-way international dispute involving a Chinese manufacturing company, an American retail giant, and a French luxury brand. The dispute centered on intellectual property, contract violations, and cultural misunderstandings that had escalated to threats of a trade war. The State Department was involved. The EU was threatening sanctions. 3 previous negotiation teams had failed. "This is different from family businesses and former friends," Evelyn warned. "This is geopolitics. One wrong move could have international implications." She was right to be worried. The first meeting was a disaster. The Chinese delegation viewed emotional expression as weakness. The Americans wanted everything in strict legal terms. The French were offended by everyone and everything. My usual approaches fell flat. When I tried to create a moment of human connection, the Chinese lead negotiator actually laughed at me. "This is not a therapy session, Miss Chen," he said in Mandarin, not knowing I understood. "This little girl thinks she can solve international trade disputes with feelings." That night, in my hotel room, I almost quit. Maybe the critics were right. Maybe there were limits to what empathy could achieve. Maybe in the real world of global business, feelings really were irrelevant. But then I remembered something Evelyn had taught me. Empathy isn't about making people feel good. It's about understanding what really drives them, what they actually care about beneath all the posturing. I spent the next 48 hours researching not the companies, but the people. The Chinese lead negotiator had a daughter studying fashion in Paris. The American CEO had started his company with a loan from his immigrant grandmother who'd worked in a sweatshop. The French creative director had grown up poor, his mother sewing knockoff designer clothes to make ends meet. When we reconvened, I didn't start with emotions. I started with stories. "Mr. Zhang," I said to the Chinese negotiator in perfect Mandarin, "your daughter Liu is studying at the Paris Fashion Institute. She wrote her admissions essay about how she wanted to bridge Eastern and Western fashion to create something that honored both traditions. This dispute is destroying the very connections she dreams of building." His face remained neutral, but I saw his hand twitch. To the American CEO, Mr. Thompson, your grandmother worked 16-hour days in a garment factory to give you the chance to build something better. What would she say if she knew your company was now being accused of the same exploitation she suffered? To the French director, Monsieur Dubois, you once said in an interview that fashion should be aspirational but accessible, that beauty shouldn't be reserved for the wealthy. This dispute is preventing millions of people from accessing the affordable luxury you've always championed. You've researched us, the Chinese negotiator said coldly. No, I've tried to understand you. There's a difference. Research tells me your positions. Understanding tells me why those positions matter to you. For the next 6 hours, I wove their personal stories into the negotiation. When they argued about intellectual property, I reminded them that they were really arguing about legacy and respect. When they fought over manufacturing standards, I reframed it as a discussion about dignity and pride. When they disagreed on pricing, I helped them see it was really about accessibility and value. The breakthrough came when the American CEO mentioned, almost offhandedly, that his grandmother had once saved for 6 months to buy a knockoff French scarf because she wanted one beautiful thing in her life. Monsieur Dubois went very quiet, then said, "My mother would have made that scarf. She was proud of her work, even if it wasn't authentic." Suddenly, they weren't 3 competing entities, but 3 people whose histories were intertwined in ways they'd never realized. The Chinese manufacturer wasn't just violating contracts. They were trying to prove they could create beauty, not just copy it. The American retailer wasn't just maximizing profits. They were trying to democratize luxury. The French brand wasn't just protecting intellectual property. They were trying to preserve the artistry that had lifted them from poverty. Once we understood what everyone actually cared about, the solution became clear. We created a 3-way partnership where the Chinese company would manufacture a new, accessible luxury line designed jointly by French and Chinese designers, sold through American retail channels. The French brand would maintain its high-end exclusivity while mentoring emerging Chinese designers. The American retailer would get exclusive distribution rights while implementing strict labor standards. Everyone won because everyone's true needs were met. The signing ceremony was held at the UN, with representatives from all 3 governments present. When the Chinese negotiator shook my hand, he said quietly in Mandarin, "You were right. Understanding is different from research. My daughter would be proud." The nomination for Negotiator of the Year came 3 months later. It was Evelyn who submitted my name, along with letters of recommendation from every client I'd ever worked with. Even Dr. Kim wrote, saying I'd saved not just her company, but her promise to her daughter. The award ceremony was held at the Waldorf Astoria, black tie mandatory, everyone who was anyone in corporate negotiation in attendance. I wore a simple black dress and my grandmother's pearl necklace, the one she'd given me before she died, telling me to always stay soft in a hard world. I didn't expect to win. The other nominees were titans of the industry, people with decades of experience and billion-dollar deals to their credit. When they called my name, I genuinely thought I'd misheard. The walk to the podium felt endless. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me, some supportive, many skeptical. And then, at table 12, I saw him. Daniel. Sitting with the Brennan and Associates team, his face a study in disbelief. Margaret Brennan was there too, her expression unreadable as I accepted the Crystal Award and approached the microphone. 4 years ago, I began, my voice steady despite the earthquake in my chest. I was told I was too sensitive for this industry. I was told that feeling everything was a weakness, that empathy was a liability, that tears had no place in a boardroom. I believed it. I quit my job, convinced I would never succeed in a world that valued hardness over humanity. The room was silent. But I learned something different. I learned that in a world of artificial intelligence and automated systems, the one thing that can't be replicated is genuine human connection. I learned that the biggest deals fall apart not because of numbers, but because of unaddressed emotions. I learned that true strength isn't about feeling nothing, it's about feeling everything and choosing how to respond. I looked directly at Daniel. To those who still believe sensitivity is weakness, I offer you this. In the last 3 years, using empathy as my primary tool, I've successfully negotiated deals worth over $50 billion, saved 12 companies from bankruptcy, prevented 3 international trade wars, and helped former enemies become partners. I've done what traditional negotiation couldn't, not in spite of my sensitivity, but because of it. Then I looked at Margaret Brennan. To the woman who told me I wasn't cut out for corporate warfare, thanking you. You were right. I wasn't cut out for warfare. I was built for something better. Corporate peacemaking. The applause started slowly, then built to something thunderous. But I wasn't finished. This award doesn't just belong to me. It belongs to every person who's been told they're too soft, too emotional, too sensitive for success. It belongs to everyone who's been mocked for crying in meetings, for caring too much, for refusing to separate business from humanity. Your sensitivity isn't a weakness to overcome. It's a superpower waiting to be unleashed. As I left the podium, people rose to their feet. Not everyone. I could see pockets of resistance, people who still believed in the old ways. But enough. More than enough. The rest of the evening was a blur of congratulations and business cards. CEOs who'd once dismissed emotional intelligence were suddenly eager to hire someone who could feel the room. Companies that had built their reputation on aggressive tactics were wondering if there might be another way. But the moment that mattered most came near the end of the night. Daniel approached me at the bar, his face carefully composed. "Congratulations," he said stiffly. "You've certainly proved me wrong." "No," I replied, surprised by how calm I felt. "I proved you irrelevant. There's a difference." His face flushed. "Sophie, You told me to find a career where sensitivity was an asset. I did. Just not in the way you expected." I turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Daniel. That acquisition you were working on when I left Brennan. The family company you destroyed? I helped them rebuild last year. They're now worth 3 times what your client paid for them. Turns out, when you honor people's emotions instead of crushing them, everybody wins." I walked away before he could respond. There was nothing he could say that mattered anymore. Later that night, in my apartment that no longer leaked, I set the Crystal Award on my mantle next to a photo Evelyn had taken of me in that Chicago kitchen, covered in flour, standing between Marcus and James as they laughed at something I'd said. The award was nice, but the photo was better. It captured the moment I'd learned the truth, that in a world increasingly divided between those who feel and those who don't, the future belongs to those brave enough to bridge the gap. My phone buzzed with a text from Evelyn. "Proud of you, partner, but don't get too comfortable. Tomorrow we have a case involving 2 countries on the brink of war. They specifically requested the sensitive one." I smiled. 4 years ago, being called sensitive would have felt like an insult. Now it felt like a battle cry. The next morning, I walked into Zhang and Chen with my head high, my heart open, and my tissues ready. Because the truth is, I still cry in meetings. The difference is, now everyone understands that my tears aren't a sign of weakness. They're a signal that we've finally gotten to what really matters. The case Evelyn mentioned turned out to be even more complex than advertised. 2 neighboring countries with a century of hostility, disputes over water rights that affected millions of people, and leaders who refused to show any vulnerability for fear of appearing weak to their citizens. Traditional diplomacy had failed repeatedly. Military intervention was being discussed. I spent 3 weeks not in conference rooms, but in the villages along the disputed river, talking to farmers, mothers, children. I collected their stories, their fears, their hopes. When I finally got the leaders in a room together, I didn't start with treaties or international law. I played them a video of 2 children, one from each country, playing together by the river, sharing a mango, completely unaware they were supposed to be enemies. "This is what we're really negotiating," I said, as both leaders watched their citizens' children laughing together. Not borders or water rights, but their future. One of the leaders, a general who'd built his career on military strength, actually wiped his eyes. "My grandson is that age," he said quietly. "It took 6 months, but we negotiated a water-sharing agreement that turned former enemies into partners in conservation." The signing ceremony was held at the river itself, with children from both countries releasing doves together. That case led to more international work. The UN created a special position for me, advisor on empathetic diplomacy. I traveled to conflict zones around the world, teaching military leaders and diplomats that acknowledging emotion wasn't just acceptable in negotiation, it was essential. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came 2 years after winning the award. Brennan and Associates was failing. Their aggressive tactics had alienated clients, their win-at-all-costs mentality had led to lawsuits, and their inability to adapt to a changing world had left them obsolete. Margaret Brennan, the woman who dismissed me as too soft for corporate warfare, called me personally. "We need your help," she said, her voice tight with the effort of asking. "You need a negotiator to handle your bankruptcy?" I asked. "No. We need someone to teach us a different way, someone to help us transform from what we were into what the world needs now." The irony was delicious, but I didn't gloat. That would have been the old way, the hard way. Instead, I said, "I'll help, but only if you're ready to acknowledge that everything you taught was wrong, that sensitivity is strength, that emotions are data, that business is personal." "Yes," she said quietly, "yes to all of it." I spent 6 months at Brennan and Associates, retraining their entire staff, teaching them to see tears as information, not weakness, to recognize fear and address it rather than exploit it, to understand that winning didn't mean someone else had to lose. Daniel was there for the first training session. He sat in the back, silent, his face a mask I could no longer read. But when I talked about the cost of emotional suppression, about how cutting ourselves off from feeling meant cutting ourselves off from crucial information, I saw him nod slightly. After the session, he approached me. "I owe you an apology," he said, "not just for what I said, but for what I believed. I thought strength meant feeling nothing. I've spent 4 years feeling nothing, and all it's brought me is emptiness." "What changed your mind?" I asked. "Watching you succeed by being everything I told you not to be, and realizing that every deal I've won using the old methods has left me feeling more hollow. I've won everything and gained nothing." "It's not too late to learn a different way," I said, and I meant it. He became one of my most dedicated students, eventually leaving Brennan to start his own firm focused on what he called humanistic negotiation. He never asked to get back together, and I never offered. Some bridges, once burned, are better left as lessons than rebuilt as paths. The transformation of Brennan and Associates became a Harvard Business School case study. From warfare to peacemaking, the radical transformation of a traditional firm. Margaret Brennan herself wrote the foreword, admitting that she'd been wrong about everything she'd believed about power and success. But the work that mattered most to me happened in smaller rooms, with individuals who'd been told, like I had, that they were too sensitive for success. I started a program called Sensitive Strength, teaching young professionals how to use their emotional intelligence as a strategic advantage. We had workshops on crying as communication, vulnerability as power, and feeling your way to success. One young woman, fresh out of college and terrified of her own empathy, came to me after a workshop. "They keep telling me to toughen up," she said, tears streaming down her face. "They say I'll never make it if I keep caring so much." "Let me tell you something," I said, handing her a tissue. "The world is full of people who've toughened up, who've learned not to care, who've mastered the art of feeling nothing. And look where it's gotten us. Broken companies, destroyed relationships, a world where winning matters more than wisdom. We don't need more tough people. We need more people brave enough to stay soft in a hard world." She went on to become one of the most successful labor negotiators of her generation, specifically because she could feel the pain of both workers and management and find solutions that addressed both. 5 years after winning that first award, I was invited to give the keynote speech at the Global Negotiation Summit. The theme was The Future of Deal-Making in an Emotional World. The same conference that had once published articles calling me too sensitive for serious business was now asking me to define the future of the industry. I stood at that podium, looking out at 1,000 faces, some old guard still skeptical, but most representing a new generation that understood that emotional intelligence wasn't optional anymore. It was essential. 10 years ago, I began, I was fired for crying in a meeting. Today, I teach Fortune 500 CEOs that tears are just another form of data. 10 years ago, I was told empathy was weakness. Today, companies pay millions for someone who can feel what their opponents are feeling. 10 years ago, I believed them when they said I was too sensitive. Today, I know that my sensitivity isn't a bug in my operating system. It's the feature that makes me irreplaceable. I talked about the revolution happening in negotiation, the shift from combat to collaboration, from winning to solving. I shared stories of deals that had succeeded because someone was brave enough to acknowledge the fear in the room, the love behind the anger, the hope beneath the hostility. The old guard will tell you that business isn't personal, I said. They're wrong. Business is the most personal thing we do because every decision affects real people with real lives and real feelings. The old guard will tell you that emotions have no place in negotiation. They're wrong. Emotions are the only thing that really matters in negotiation because positions can change, but feelings tell you why those positions exist in the first place. The old guard will tell you that sensitivity is weakness. They're not just wrong, they're extinct. Because in a world where artificial intelligence can crunch numbers and analyze data better than any human, the one thing that makes us irreplaceable is our ability to feel, to empathize, to connect on a human level. So to everyone who's been told you're too sensitive, too emotional, too soft for success, I have this to say: you're not too anything. You're exactly what this world needs. Your sensitivity is your superpower. Your emotions are your intelligence. Your softness is your strength. Don't let anyone convince you to harden your heart in the name of success. The world has enough hard people making hard decisions that lead to hard outcomes. What we need are soft people making wise decisions that lead to healing. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes, but more importantly, the ideas spread. Companies started hiring chief empathy officers. Business schools added courses on emotional intelligence. The old model of negotiation as warfare gave way to a new model of negotiation as healing. I still have that crystal award on my mantle, now joined by dozens of others. But the recognition that matters most isn't the awards or the accolades. It's the emails I get from young professionals who were told they were too sensitive, who found the courage to stay soft in a hard world, who discovered that their empathy was their edge. Last month, I got an email that made me cry. And yes, I still cry easily, probably more than ever. It was from the founder's daughter from that first awful acquisition at Brennan, the one whose tears had triggered my own breakdown and eventual departure. Ms. Chen, she wrote, you probably don't remember me, but I was the woman who broke down crying in that meeting years ago. Everyone told me I was too emotional, that I'd embarrassed myself, that I'd shown weakness in front of sharks. But then I heard about what you'd become, how you'd turned that same weakness into your greatest strength. You gave me permission to be who I am. I just closed a deal that saved 300 jobs and preserved my father's legacy, and I did it by being vulnerable enough to show how much it mattered. Thank you for showing me that tears can be more powerful than any weapon. I wrote back immediately, I remember you. You were the beginning of everything. Your tears in that room weren't weakness, they were truth. And truth, no matter how soft it sounds, is always stronger than lies, no matter how hard they seem. As I finished typing that email, my assistant knocked on my door. Sophie, your 2 o'clock is here. It's the mediation between those two tech companies, the ones whose founders haven't spoken in 5 years. I stood, smoothed my dress, and grabbed my signature box of tissues. Send them in, and brew some tea. The good stuff. This is going to be emotional. Because that's what I do now. I make rooms safe for feelings. I create spaces where titans of industry can admit they're scared. I give permission for power to coexist with vulnerability. I prove every single day that the thing that makes us most human, our ability to feel deeply, is also the thing that makes us most powerful. The world told me I was too sensitive. They were right. I am too sensitive for the old world, the hard world, the world where winning mattered more than wisdom. But I'm exactly sensitive enough for the world we're building now. A world where empathy is intelligence, where vulnerability is courage, and where the people who feel everything aren't the weak ones. They're the ones who change everything.